In this video, we're going to validate the DNA Center. We're going to make sure everything is good to go and ready. And then what we're going to do is we're going to build and integrate an identity services engine, and we're going to do it starting right now. First thing we need to do is validate the configuration for the DNA Center. I'm going to browse to 10.1.97.101 in my lab, and I'm going to log into the console using the credentials that we provided of admin and ISE is cool. Now, once I have accessed this console, we'll be presented with the dashboard. And inside of the dashboard, I'm going to see first and foremost that my current software updates have been completed. I'm going to go to those software updates, and I just want to point out the fact that we are current in the version that we are running at this time, which is again going to be 1317. And it's also going to be very important for us to note that if we want to upgrade our system at this point, what we would end up doing is we'd end up clicking the switch now, and that would change us over to a newer version, not the newest version of 1339. I've found that version of the operating system to be far more stable in environments where I'm going to have a group of students that are going to be accessing the same DNA Center as we would in similar production environments. So I just want to make certain that you guys are aware of that. I am going to be staying with version 1.3.1.7 throughout this entire video series. Now, the reason I'm doing that again is because it's going to be the version that is going to be best aligned with what you're going to see in the lab exam. Now, what we want to do is we want to add the other portion to this. What we're going to want to do now is we're going to want to create an identity services engine. The identity services engine will need to be integrated into our vSphere environment. And based on the suggestion of one of our subscribers, what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to build this entire lab in a single footprint server. I don't know if this is going to be possible, but we are going to give it a try. Now, I do want to point out one caveat, and that is going to be that if I take a look at my server, you will note that I actually have configured on this server 512 gigs of RAM. Now, I know that that exceeds what I was discussing in previous videos, but the suggestion was made, is it possible or would it be possible to cram all of this functionality into one server? Or do I need to acquire two? And I didn't have a definitive answer for that. So what I want to do is I want to take this as an opportunity to kind of pursue that, but obviously keep in mind that if you had more than one server, you could connect those servers to a switch. We can create the VMware standard switching infrastructure inside of each of those devices, and we can link them in such a way that we can still communicate. But I'm going to go for one server just to see. Now, again, this is going to be 80 logical CPUs, and it's going to also have 512 gigs of RAM and far more hard drive storage than what we discussed. In fact, I think this resource actually has along the lines of, I think it's 4 terabytes. So with that, let's go ahead and see if we can't make this happen. I'm going to add my ISE engine. I'm going to add my ISE engine by going back into my VMs and templates. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to a section here referred to as external services, and I'm going to create a new identity services engine using a downloadable OVA from Cisco. I will right-click and say I want to deploy an Ovf template. I'm going to do this using locally connected files, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to look for an OVA, and that OVA in my lab is going to end up being the small form factor version of 2.7. I'm going to go ahead and say open. And what we're going to do is we are going to start this installation process. I'm going to leave this in external servers. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to call this my Home Lab ISE. And what we will do is I'm going to hit next. We're going to deploy it using next again. It will validate the image, and if all goes well, we should be able to create this virtual machine. Once the virtual machine is created, we'll go ahead and give it its baseline configuration, everything necessary to allow it to communicate to the DNAC, and we'll integrate it. So I'm going to go ahead and hit next one more time. This is going to be an evaluation. Next. take the default config, and I'll go ahead and change that to thin provisioned. We will connect it to the network that we're going to be working with, which is going to end up being the enterprise network. And we will hit finish. This virtual machine should go through the process of being built out, and we can see here that we are going to be progressing through our overall build. Now, obviously, like everything else, this is going to take some time, and we're going to be starting these things from scratch. Now, while this is happening, the next thing that I want to do is I want to get a snapshot of my DNA center. Now, my suggestion is since that we use 600 gig drive space, is we're going to shut this machine down, and then what we're going to do is we're going to take a snapshot of it, and then we'll fire it back up, and we will then give that some time to reload, and what we'll do is we'll integrate the ISE engine. So what we'll do now is take a look at the Home Lab DNA Center, and what I'm going to do from this device is I'm going to right-click on it, and I'm going to say I want to power it off. Now that it is powered off, I will right-click on it, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a snapshot, and that snapshot is going to be my baseline for -13-1-7. We'll take that snapshot. Once that snapshot is complete, all I'm going to do then is validate that it's there. I'll right-click and say Manage My Snapshots. And here it is, and I am at this point. So what we're going to do now is we're going to turn it back on. Let that reboot. And again, like I said, what we will do is we are going to wait for the virtual machine to finish building. We're building our identity services engine, and once that identity service engine has been created, we're going to access its console, and we're going to do all of our baseline configuration on that device. We can see that the installation of this virtual machine has finished. Now what we're going to do is we're going to turn it on, we're going to log into it, and we're going to give it its baseline config. It's not very hard. Stay tuned and we'll knock that out. Next, we're going to turn on the ISE engine by selecting it, right-clicking, and say Power On. As soon as the device comes on, I'll go ahead and initiate a session to it, which will mean a web console. From the web console, we're going to be asked to enter the setup information because this is the very first time that this device has been brought online. So by typing setup and pressing enter, it will give us the installation wizard. This device is going to be called ISE1. It will have an IP address of 100.64.0.201. The mask will be a /24 mask. The gateway will be 100.64.0.1. We will not configure an IPv6 address, and the domain name will be micronicslab.com. The name server will be 183.1.1.1 as the primary. I will provide a secondary of 8.8.8.8. We will not have a tertiary name server. I will give it an NTP address of the one specified of time.nist.gov. I'm not going to include a second, and we will use an Eastern Standard Time Zone, and we must enable SSH in order to integrate this device with our DNAC. We will use the admin username, and we will have a password of ICE is cool. Repeating that, ICE is cool. And what will end up happening now is the device is going to go into configuration and installation mode. It will validate and check all of the configurations at the interface level. Then it will check the NTP, determining whether or not the gateway of last resort is going to be reachable. And then once that process is complete, the system will then go into build mode, where it will start installing all of the applications and features that are going to allow an identity services engine to do what an identity service engine does. And then once that's all taken care of, what we're going to do is we're going to integrate this device into our DNA Center infrastructure. Until then, let's go ahead and watch it, and we'll see what happens. All right, the time's come for us to double check and make sure everything's ready. I'm going to log into my ICE engine by typing admin, and I'm going to use the password of ICE is cool, just like we specified. And let's see if it lets me log in. And we can see here that it has. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to say show application status ICE. And I want to see what the status is going to come back with regarding this particular appliance that we're building. Now, it's still early in its build, so it would not surprise me if it's not quite ready yet. We can see that we do have a number of services. So in the app database server, we have 66 processes that are operational and running. We see that we have our Active Directory connector, we've got the ICE engine, and we have the application server. The biggest thing for me right now is the application server. I want to make certain that the application server is ready and is functioning the way that I need it to function. So at this particular instance, this machine seems like it's ready for us to begin interacting with. Now, the next step is going to be to access this resource via our browser. Now, in order to be able to access this resource via our browser, we're going to have a device that is going to exist inside of our management network. Now, that means I'm going to need to create a host that is going to be connected to this network segment. So the object of the exercise right now is going to be to get a workstation up and operational in our environment in such a way that we can interact with this platform. That's going to be what we're going to be doing in the next part of the video. I have created a Home Lab Workstation. Now, this is just a Windows machine that is going to be accessible from outside of my environment and inside of my pod environment. What I'm going to do is I'm going to open an RDP session up to that machine and log in, student. And from this, what I want to do is I want to validate that I've got some reachability to the devices in question. So I'm just going to open a command prompt, and I'm going to make certain that I can ping 8.8.8.8 to get out to the outside world, which I can. I'm going to ping 100.64.0.101, the IP address of my DNAC. I'm going to ping 100.64.0.201, the IP address of my ICE engine. And right now, I am as good to go as I can expect to be. Now, what I want to do from this perspective is I want to, first of all, access the web console of my DNA Center and my ICE engine. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and function in guest mode. We'll expand this. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to 100.64.0.101, which should be my DNA Center. I'm going to log into it. Admin. ICE is cool. So far, everything looks great. Let's go ahead and go to system settings. We note specifically that we don't have any orange bars or anything telling us anything has failed, and I just want to lay eyes on the fact that we have automation and assurance is all green. And if I scroll down, we can see that there are no ICE engines currently integrated with this device. Let's go ahead and access the ICE engine. So from it, I am going to say 100.64.0.201. I'm going to say, yes, it's unsafe. We're using self-signed certificates. And I'm going to say admin ICE is cool. If all goes well, this should give me access to the console of this ICE engine. We will be using evaluation licenses. This means that anyone that can get access to the OVA has the capability of being able to build this resource in their environment. Now, what I want to do at this particular juncture is I want us to talk a little bit because it's going to be really important to understand what it is we're trying to accomplish here. We need to create an identity services engine, and we are going to use that to be the tool that we're going to deploy to create policy to dictate who can access what system, how to log into different resources, things like 802.1x. Ultimately, it's going to be where you're going to implement everything from wired to wireless functionality if that's where your interest lies. Our main objective at this particular point is to get the baseline configuration of the ISE engine into the platform so that we can onboard it. But there's a few things I want to talk about here because there are some key components to this that I would consider as caveats, especially if you're preparing for the Enterprise Infrastructure Exam. A lot of students have a tendency to kind of not pay attention to the ISE engine because it's not a security certificate or security certification. Now, that can be dangerous. There are some fundamental configurations that need to be done on the Identity Services engine that are going to need to be there before it can serve a purpose inside of our lab environment. Whether that lab environment is going to be your home lab that we're building or whether it's going to be your testing environment that you're going to sit at when you go to a testing center. So what we want to do at this particular juncture is go through all of the stages of preparation for this ISE engine so that we can get it onboarded with our DNA Center. Now, to start, I'm going to go to the Administration tab, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the Deployment section. Now, under the Deployment section, we're going to be warned that we're operating in standalone mode. Now, I understand that we are operating in standalone mode, and I'm not going to modify that, but if I were, I would go to the same place that we're going to go to make some of our core changes. If I wanted to have more than one ISE engine operating in a cluster, I could designate one of those devices to be the primary just simply by clicking on this little green section right here. But we're going to leave it alone. We're not going to worry about configuring this as a cluster. It's just going to be a cluster of one device. And as a direct result of that, there are going to be some features that we're going to need to be to enable in order to be able to support DNA Center functions. Among them are going to be things like TACACS. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in and I'm going to enable Sbx Service. This is going to be the SGT Exchange Protocol. I'm also going to enable Device Admin Service, which is going to activate TACACS Plus. With that done, what I'm going to do is I'm going to next enable the process known as Platform Exchange Grid. I'm going to hit Save, and we're going to apply these configurations. Next, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the Settings tab, and under the Settings tab, I want to look at the ERS settings. ERS settings, or the External RESTful Services, is going to be the API that we're going to be exposing for the purposes of configuring and working with this device. And what I want to do is I want to enable it for read-write operations. This is going to help facilitate the integration of the DNA Center to the Identity Services engine. I'm going to hit Save. Now, the next thing that we're also going to need is to create some users. Now, I at this particular juncture of my process, I'm only going to be interested in one user, and that's going to be what I'm going to refer to as the net admin user. So I'm going to go back to administration. I'm going to go to identities, and under identities, what I'm going to do is I'm going to click add, and we're going to create a new user. That user is going to be referred to as net admin. This will be the password username combination that we're going to use to access every device that we're going to discover using our DNA Center. That will include our 9Ks, it will include our 3850s, it will include 3650s, depending on what devices you acquire, as well as the ability to be able to interact with some virtual devices. So what I'm going to do at this particular juncture is I'm just going to say netadmin@micronixlab.com. I'm going to create the login password, which is going to be ICE is cool. ICE is cool for the repeat. And then for the enable password, I'm going to use the same thing. ICE is cool and ICE is cool. Now, the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to scroll down to where it says user groups, and I'm going to hit the down arrow, and I'm going to make this part of all accounts. In other words, global access to all account details, and my login passwords don't match. So let's go ahead and re-enter those. Sometimes I type them too fast. ICE is cool. ICE is cool. Let's do the enable. ICE is cool. and ICE is cool. Let's give it one more try and see if it applies. This user is extremely important. Without it, there's no way on earth that you can pass the lab. Whatever that user is, DNA admin, whatever it is, there are caveats. One, it must exist, and two, it needs to have the access to all of the identity groups that it may need to perform its function. In my lab, I just simply give it access to everything. The other thing is that it must be a valid login, and the passwords that are entered into this account must match the passwords that are applied to the devices that the DNAC is going to end up controlling. Now, the last thing that we're going to need to do is going to be to move towards network centers. And under network centers, I'm going to go to my device admin policy sets. I'm going to see that I have a default policy set. I'm merely going to hit the arrow. And what I'm going to do is I am going to edit this. You will note that by default, this is using a policy set of deny all commands and deny all access to shell resources. We are going to need to modify this. Again, this modification is critical. Unless you implement this and make certain that you assign them at the time that they're created, you will not be able to build a working identity services engine that is going to be integrated into the DNA Center. So with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and hit the plus sign here, and I'm going to create a new command set, and I'm going to call it netadmin_cmd for commands. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to check permit any command that is not listed. So in other words, all commands. By checking this, I'm saying any command that's not listed here, this user has access to. I'm going to hit submit. Now, what I'm going to call your attention to here is noted that it did not dynamically assign it. I'm going to remove the deny, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the netadmin_command. The next thing that we're going to want to do is create a new set for shell access. This, again, is going to be, I'm going to call it netadmin_shell. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and assign a default privilege of level 15 to this account, giving it all of the capabilities that it's ever going to need in order to be able to do its job. But again, notice it did not dynamically get applied. I'll click the X, and I will say use netadmin shell. Now, at this particular juncture, what I'm doing is I'm saving these policies to this device for the purposes of trying to make certain that everything is in place. Now, let's go back through what I did. I activated TACACS. I enabled PXGrid. I created a settings for ERS. I created an admin user under identities called netadmin. NetAdmin, whatever you create there needs to be different than what is used to log into the ICE engine. So if you use admin on the ICE, you cannot use admin on devices that the ICE engine is going to control. The name has to be different. The other thing is bear in mind that if a device already exists in your infrastructure and you want to use the DNAC to discover it and you want this process to work, bear in mind that the passwords that are used on those devices will need to match the passwords that have been configured inside of the ICE engine. The next thing that I did is I went and I looked at my device policy sets, and I used the device policy sets to create everything that I'm going to need with regard to privilege and the access to shell. And I did that kind of cheating. I gave the user the Priv 15 capability, which is basically here's the keys to the kingdom so you can do what you need to do. Now, with these things done, the last thing that I want to check is I'm going to go to administration and I'm going to navigate to PXGrid services, and I want to see a green bar down here that says that the extensible messaging and presence protocol is up and operational for the ICE engine that is going to be known as ICE 1 Micronics Lab Now, the next thing that we're going to need to do is validate and verify some reachability information before we go through this onboarding process, because it's going to require us to have DNS resolution, because we're going to be forced to use a fully qualified domain name to integrate these two platforms together. In order to be able to do that, we have to make certain that we have the ability to resolve those IDs, and I'm going to do that on my core router. We'll take a look at that just in a second.